Hello, welcome to What's Bubbling at ZIM video. I am Inventor Dan Zen, and in this What's Bubbling, let's take a look at sprite sheets and updates to the sprite. Now we'll go to the ZIM site, and if we scroll down here, it used to be the skateboard example or the texture packer example that we had was presented here. But we're now taking a look at Dynamo and Accelerator, and indeed we'll do a bubbling on that. That's even more new stuff relating to sprites. But if we come down here into the examples, we had to tuck away the texture packer example down here. And here it is, a bit bigger. There he is. That's a texture packer guy walking across the screen. Now, texture packer is a way to make sprite sheets, and sprite sheets are a bunch of pictures arranged in a single sheet or image that you can then play, and Create.js provides support for that with its sprite, and we're piggybacking on the Create.js sprite with some changes that I'm going to show you. All right, so let's go in and take a look at the code that was used to make this. Here is the code, texture packer and ZIM demo. In the code, there's also a link to the skateboard example. Maybe I'll show you the skateboard example. Shall we take a look at that? Whee! So that's a guy on a skateboard, and this is a slightly more advanced one where we're playing different animations in the sprite. So a sprite comes with a bunch of frames, and you can specify certain frames to be an animation and give it a label, and then you can run that label. All right, so that's what we're doing there, and we're going to take a look at both of these in the bubbling. So pop back into the code here. There's also a blog post on it, so you can read about that, and that blog post has certain techniques that will help you with texture packer as well, which is one way to get sprite sheets. You can also go out onto the web and find lots of sprite sheets. Most of those will not come with any data, but ZIM Sprite can still read them in, and you tell it how many rows and columns. So that's traditionally, there was a ZIM bit on sprites, an explosion. So you're welcome to look at that traditional technique of bringing in sprites. There's also things like Adobe Animate, which can export sprite sheets, and Zoe can do things, so there's other ways of doing it as well. Here's a video tutorial on some of those old things though, and now we're making this bubbling on some of the new things, okay, as well, and here's a link to the documentation. So when we want to make a sprite sheet, we're going to bring in the data. So that was another new thing bubbling at ZIM is our load assets now handles JSON data. Of course, Create.js had a preload.js class, and that handled all sorts of things, including JSON and text. And we've now brought those into the load assets to work in the same way as images and sound. So here's an image and another image. This is the sprite sheet image, and here's a background. So let's just take a look at that JSON data quickly. It's here in the assets library. There's assets. So if we take a look at assets here, there it is, guy.json. So it says what image to use. This was exported from texture packer, and here are the frames, and that's detailing where on the sprite sheet the images are, and a few other things like registration points or something like that in there. Here's animations. Now I can't remember if we adjusted this or if this got exported with it, but anyway, we have an animation called start going from frame 1 to 4, an animation called glide, or with a label called glide, and staying on number 5 on frame 5, which, whatever, that one or something. And then we have an end animation where it's sort of stepping from the skateboard, for instance. I can't remember for sure which ones those are. And that's, you can read about that on the Create.js site, and there's also on the blog on Sprites, it tells you a little bit about the plans for that. These are basic. Initially, ZIM Sprites needed to follow sort of these basic ways. The Create.js sprite sheet had a number of ways to nest labels and do all sorts of complicated things in here as well. And now with further improvements with the ZIM Dynamo. We introduced support for most of those, I think, as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we look at a future what's bubbling, when we look at the dynamos and accelerators for the sprites. Okay, but let's just stick to the basics for this one. And indeed, in the very first one, it just plays the sprite outright. It doesn't even use these animations. But in the skateboard version, it does use them. Here's the guy. That's what the guy looks like. This is from Texture Packer. You would throw a bunch of images in like that, and then it just lays them out for you. Now, there's a couple different settings in Texture Packer. One of them I found didn't quite work, so you'll want to read the blog and find out which settings I used in terms of how this is packed. Okay. So that's the guy. Close that. Close the JSON. We are loading in the JSON. We're loading in the guy and the background image. When it is complete, we will set there's the background image, and we're adding that to the stage using our chaining. We have a new sprite here, and here we are using a configuration object, the ZIM Duo technique, to add the JSON information here. We just use the same way that we accessed the background image or a sound. This is how we would access a sound, frame.asset, round brackets, quote, mysound.mp3, and then we would say .play, round bracket. And here, our JSON, frame.asset, guy.json, and that takes the JSON file and puts it into the JSON parameter of the sprite. If you don't have data, then you can still use a sprite, and there's an example of that. Well, the explosion of old is an example, but also we'll be doing an upcoming bubbling capture on the controller, the motion controller, and that uses a butterfly, and the butterfly was found on the internet, and it's a sprite sheet without data. So that's another example of how we can bring in a sprite sheet without a JSON file. This JSON file, by the way, was exported from Texture Packer using the easel.js or create.js settings. So they're in Texture Packer, they have support for easel.js, the create.js module. Okay, so we center our sprite, we scale it, we position it, we move it. So this is a traditional ZIM move. We're just moving it from wherever it is, 0, 0, I think. It's minus 100 and 180 down. We're moving it from there to the stage width. So the sprite goes across the stage in 700 milliseconds or 7 seconds. The loop is set to true, it's linear, and we're giving it an ID of guy. By giving that an ID and also by giving our sprite running an ID, we can then pause the whole thing, the movement and the sprite animation at once. Okay, so that's moving, and next we chain the run method. So this is the new run method for a sprite. And this is indeed what's bubbling right here. So there are traditional ways to move a sprite with create.js, and that would be go to and play, go to and stop, I guess, and maybe a play. But these things are linked to the frame rate. And I found that that's a little bit awkward sometimes. So the run is not. What I found myself doing was animating the frames using ZIM Animate, because you can animate the frame number with ZIM Animate. And I was doing that a few times, and I went, oh, okay, let's just make a run method that does that, that's a little bit special. So the run method filters out certain things that don't make sense from ZIM Animate, and then it adds a few other things, as well as we'll see in the complicated example coming up. So here's the simple example where we're just running. Now, if you want to run that sprite, you could just run it. And so that would run the sprite without any extra information. But here we're saying, please run the sprite in this amount of time, 700 milliseconds. Actually, I'm not sure if you can just run. Yeah, you can run it, but it has a default of 1,000 milliseconds. If you just say run 700, that would be, hey, it just runs it and at 700 milliseconds. It won't loop, though. And there's loop true, and we're giving that an ID as well. So isn't that cool? run it in 700 milliseconds, so we can slow that down. We'll make a really slow guy. We could make it 1700, so that's 1 second. He would be slow. We might want to slow this down to 14 or something like that. We'll save that. And now we should have a slow guy. Da, 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 and there he is slowing. Now note that we had to change the speed in the 2 places there, and it gets even trickier if we were to say animate the background using a scroller. We've got all these different speeds, and that is indeed what Accelerator does. It takes all of those running at normal speeds, you add them to an accelerator, and the accelerator you just change one thing and it changes all the speeds proportionally. It's just marvelous. So we'll see that in upcoming bubbles. Also, this is a sprite that is running within this amount of time. Well, let's adjust that back again. What was that? I'll just undo. There, almost there we go. This is a sprite that is specifically running in 700 milliseconds. Well, we might want a sprite that is able to change speed. And indeed, that's what a dynamo is. So a dynamo is a sprite that you can change how quickly that sprite is animating. So that's really cool, and we'll see that in the upcoming bubbles as well. Neat. So this is the basic one, and there we are pausing. Now pausing looks a little bit more confusing than it might be. It might have been great just to say sprite.paused equals true or sprite.paused equals false. First of all, paused is a create.js property, so I didn't mess with that. You can still try and use that, but it's not. It'll work with create.js type animations, but it's not going to work with the ZIM animations. So we've adjusted it to a run paused, as this is the property that tells you whether it is paused or not. But there's also a pause run method. So how's that for how's that for some fun? There's a pause run method because you can do more than just pause. You can pause on a certain frame number. You can slow down a pause, so spend a certain amount of time pausing a sprite. You can pause a label of a sprite. So there's a bunch of different things that you can do when you pause the running of a sprite when you run it with the ZIM run there, okay, or the sprites run method. So what we're saying is, hey, if the sprite is not paused, then pause it, and if it is paused, then unpause it, sort of thing. We're also saying that if it is paused, then please make it go to and stop on frame 5. Okay, cool, huh? And that means that if we want, we've got this thing. This now should be faster if I saved it. Yeah, there he is, and I press, and he pauses. And note, each time, no matter where he is, he's going to stop on that one with his heel back on the end. That's as close as I have to standing in this. I mean, we could have drawn a fully standing one. There didn't happen to be one, so there's the pause state that I want. All right, let's go to that next one, which was the skateboard. So skateboard in there. Skateboard. I think maybe not. Hello, skateboard. Did I lose the internet? What's happening? You know, it's funny, I made a change to the skateboard. Oh, I didn't really want to poke that. I made a change to the skateboard, and I was closing down some things, and it said, do you want to save this? And I went, yeah, but I don't know what I changed. So 134. So there's obviously a little change in 134. Let's go see what that is. 134. It's funny, as I did it, I said, oh, I better not do that. That's bad. End of ready. I don't know. Button. Looks like something funny is going on there. Not sure why there's a / there. Yeah, okay, well, let's see if now, maybe it just got in there accidentally. I don't want FTP, I want to open in browser. Yeah. So there, by the way, is the mute button if you're tired of that. And that's the skateboard guy going across. There is his glide. He just glides, and there is his run right there. And if you press him, he does this little, you can only press when he's doing his glide. You can't press when he's running. Watch, I'll try pressing when he's running. See, no pop. So there he pops there. So we had to put a bit of logic in place to handle that. And if we scroll up, and scroll down. Okay, so here we are. You all ready? Take a deep breath. We have a new waiter here. We've got more assets to load in here. So we wanted a waiter, so we put a waiter on the stage and we're showing that. We're loading the skateboard sound, the guy again, or the guy's JSON, the guy's PNG, a background, and the skateboard PNG, all from the assets. When it's complete, we hide the waiter. Here we are setting our own check variable called interactive. We're setting that to false. And within our animation, this is kind of neat, within our animation of the sprite, we have calls, ways to call at certain points and call a function. And so we call a function that will toggle whether or not our man's going to be interactive. And then in the mouse click, if it's interactive, then we do something. If it's not interactive, then we don't. So that's how we're handling it. We have a sound. It's the skateboard MP3, and we're playing it. This is how you loop. You loop to -1, we'll loop forever, and we're reducing the volume a little bit on that. We put our background image on the stage. We've got a holder to hold our guy and the skateboard, and this allows us to move the guy and the skateboard across with a traditional move. So we've positioned the holder. We also set the registration point of the holder, and that is so that when we rotate it, so pop the wheelie, it will be on the wheel, and the whole thing, the skateboard and the guy, will rotate around the wheel. Now to position that, we did a dot outline like so, and the dot outline will show us where the registration point is, and we fiddled with it that way until we got it right. Okay, and there's some information on that technique down at the bottom. We have a sprite. We bring in the sprite like we did the last one with the JSON. We add it to the holder this time. We scale the sprite. We set its registration point so its foot is in the right place of the, whatever else, and this, so forth and so on. So a bit of fiddling there. And we're running it. This time when we run it, we're not just running the whole thing, the whole sprite, but we're running an animation series. And we did a ZIM bubbling on animation series. That was, I think, the last ZIM bubbling. So if you don't know what an animation series is, please have a look there. But basically, it's an array of single animations that will happen one after another. So in this case, the labels will be, we'll do start, we'll do glide, and we'll do end. And the times for each are the 300, 300, and 300, turns out equally, which means we probably could have, down here, we could have put a time of 300, and it would have defaulted each of these to be 300. We do have a loop down here and an ID, but our loop is going to say, hey, keep on looping that whole series that we just did. Now there's also loops within the series. So when we glide, we're going to be 300, but we're also looping through that, and we're looping 4 times, and we're rewinding that glide. So in other words, that animation is pretty cool. That guy is, well, it's actually the skew that's happening there. So, sorry. We are animating the glide, that's fine, but the glide, I think if you recall, was just 1 frame, so that's not going to be much with a loop and a rewind. But it's actually, we're using that loop and rewind for the skew thing here. So not only are we animating the sprite, but we're animating properties of the sprite, such as its skew and Y position, its skew, and again, its skew and Y position. And that's what's giving that animation. The skew is kind of making him look like he's moving a little bit, and the Y position is allowing him to go down and up on the skateboard. So let's take a look at that a bit more closely. There he is going by. You see how he's skewed? Look at his head. It's like a cheat anyway, but it gives it some bit of motion. He's not just standing there. And then as he goes, he's here at this level, but when he runs, he moves down to a lower level. So that's not necessarily easy to do, to sync all that stuff, but this technique here with the ZIM run is pretty cool because we can put traditional animation objects in there as well. Oh, here it ends there. Okay, so we're not only animating the frames, but we're using traditional animations in there as well. Okay, and so this all explains that if you need it a little bit more slowly. We've also got when something happens, here's the call to set the interactive to true. So from this point on, interactive will be true, but then after it does the glide loop, interactive is false. We set interactive as false. So that allows us to interact only when it's during the glide loop there. It got set to true here, and after it was finished, it got set to false. Okay, so we then move the whole holder. So this is moving the whole holder. Note when we do this, we set the override to false. That will stop it from stopping any other animations on objects in the holder. So you need to do that. I did think, and now that I was doing more animations with sprites, I kind of thought, hey, perhaps we should set override to false by default. But that causes problems for beginners who come into ZIM and try and animate multiple times on the same object, and all of a sudden, instead of one animation stopping the other animation and going one after another, they both go at the same time, and sometimes can cause something to jump from here to there, here to there, here to there, you know, like it'll go blah, 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 which is really bad. So we'll keep override to true so that it stops any prior animations. But if you know what you're doing, then you can always manually say override false on there. And here's a case. If we don't say override false, it will stop the sprite animations basically on this, which we don't want. Okay, some comments on using the outline to position things, and there might be some more information on that too in the blog post on this. Should I show you the blog post? There's the skateboard, and we're just adding and positioning it. We've got some mouse down stuff where we're pausing. So if it's interactive, we're going to pause. We go to and stop on 7, so it will do this. I guess that's the best sprite frame for the popping the wheelie or whatever they call that in skateboarding. And then we're also animating the holder in a certain way. What are we doing there? What happens is, when is this? Holder.animate, that's if it's interactive. The object's rotation. Oh yeah, of course, we're animating the rotation. So that's what makes the sprite pop the wheelie like that. Here, I'll show you. Boom, there it goes. Okay, and that was that animation. And it comes back, and when it's done, when that animation is done, see it's got a rewind true on it. When that animation is done, we call this, which says sprite go to 5. That's the starting position, and then unpause the animation. So through all of this, we're aware of where in the animation the sprite is, somewhat. I guess not so much, actually, because we just sort of say, hey, quickly go to 7, quickly go to 5, and that's okay. We get away with it. There may be some animations where you can't. You need a transition animation. So if you want an example of transition animations, the butterfly example is a really good one. And we'll see an upcoming bubbling on that, where we were wanting the butterfly to go left and right, but it looked kind of choppy if we just all of a sudden flipped it. So the animation, the sprite sheet actually came with transition animations to be able to fly from one way to the other way. And that makes it really, really smooth. You can't, it sort of delays the transition a little bit, but makes it really, really smooth anyway. All right, super. So we've seen a sprite sheet. Way to go, guys. So have fun with that. We're going to see some upcoming adjustments and improvements to the sprite world with a dynamo and the accelerator. So look forward to that. I'm inventor Dan Zen at What's Bubbling at ZIM. Ciao.